Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Republican media availability, and thank you for joining us. With us today on the House side are House Republican leader J.T. Wilcox from the 2nd District and Representative Drew Stokesbury, ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee and from the 31st District. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican leader John Braun from the 20th District and Senator Linda Wilson, ranking member operating on the Senate Ways and Means Committee and from the 17th District. And with that, I will turn it over to House Republican leader J.T. Wilcox for some opening remarks.
Well, thanks very much, John, and thank you to those reporters that are here today. I'd like to start out with a recognition that a King County deputy sheriff was shot yesterday, I think, is in the hospital now. I believe I read serious condition. I don't think that the name of that deputy has been released yet, so we can't recognize him or her with a name, but we should acknowledge the sad occasion and send our best wishes to his or her family. Next, a related topic. In the House, we have yet to see a hearing scheduled for the pursuit bill. I've heard on some interviews recently that it's a difficult topic for the House Democrats. I'm sure that's true. And I know what it feels like to have difficult topics in a caucus, but this is a difficult topic for people all over the state of Washington. And it's not just the people that have to, through no fault of their own, find themselves involved in serious violent crimes. There are plenty of other crimes like the epidemic of auto theft that disrupts people's lives in major ways, can cause large consequences, and in any case involves something that they worked very hard to do, and the assumption that everybody is perfectly insured so it doesn't hurt them, I think is false. And so I would urge the House Democrats to not only take up the Senate bill, but strongly consider the efforts that we're all going to be making to make that a stronger bill, not simply a watered down piece of legislation that will get the public off our backs for a while. This should be real progress. And we should end this experiment in deciding not to enforce laws. We have some major news about budgets and revenue forecasts coming up, but because the Senate is coming out with budgets first this year, I believe that I will defer to the experts over there, and then a little later to one of the best budget minds in Washington, Representative Drew Stokesbury. So back to you, John.
Senator Braun.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for being on this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, it's week 11. We're in budget season, and we got our top budget folks on the line that will talk to you about the budget. As much as I'd like to talk about the budget, I'm going to defer to our expert in the Senate, Senator Linda Wilson. I will tell you this: even as budgets roll out, you're going to continue to see a focus on our top priorities: public safety. In addition to the work that we continue to hope gets wrapped up with Blake decision and with the vehicular pursuit bill, I'm hopeful you'll see funding to match in the budget that will deal with some of the challenges we have in public safety, particularly regional law enforcement training centers, as an example. On affordability, I'm hopeful you'll see a budgets come out from both sides, but certainly from the Senate, that don't have new taxes that make it less affordable to live here in the state of Washington. And then when it comes to education, I'm hopeful that you see investments in intensive tutoring, in special education, things that get our kids back on track and properly fund our K-12 public education system. So even during budget season, we can stay focused on the things that are most important to the people here in the state of Washington. And I know there's a lot of folks on, so I'm going to end there and turn it over to my friend and colleague, Senator Linda Wilson.
Sorry, I had to find my mouse. Thank you. Good morning. So I guess what I'll start off with is that we did have the economic forecast, revenue forecast council meeting yesterday, and came out with some, I wouldn't say somber news, but expected, I guess. We shouldn't be surprised that we are in the midst of a slowdown. We are okay. Our budget is sound now. We started out at $6 billion in excess revenue, and outside of the maintenance level, covering all expenses required, we're down to about $4.5 billion, which is still a substantial amount. So, and this forecast for the rest of the year is at 200 million, so we're fine. But as we move on into future years, then of course we'll see about 450,000 or a million, sorry, too many zeros, less next year in that budget cycle, and then another 500 million in the following. So about $1 billion in the next 4 years. So certainly we've been seeing that a lot of this was because there was reduced REIT revenues, and there's reduced personal income and ongoing increases in interest rates by the feds, which so the same issues that are affecting our banks these days are also affecting our revenues. It's affecting the construction industry is lower. Their reduced home buying because of the high interest rates, and other major purchases are down because of the interest rates. Again, cars and large appliances and all. So we've, I guess one of the final points I'd like to make is knowing it is clear, though, that we are fine right now in our budget, and so we don't need to raise taxes. So again, I would like to reiterate what Senator Braun said. We're hoping to get a budget out that does not have any increase in taxes. We have been asking for tax relief for the people for a few years now, and that didn't happen. Nearly every other state in the union found a way to give tax relief back to their families, but we did not. So we are most certainly shouldn't be making it harder on families right now by increasing taxes now or in the future. And the legislature should be taking a cautious approach to the budget. State spending has doubled in the past 10 years. And so we need to keep expenditures under control so that we don't put the onus on the backs of the hardworking taxpayer to keep the state budget afloat. So I think that's, I can go over the capital budget a little bit if we want to. That was rolled out yesterday. It was well received. I think we had a pretty good committee meeting on that. There was like $894 million that went to K-12 education projects. School construction, there was a good portion that went toward housing, 625 million. 2.3 billion for water and fish hatchery, toxic cleanup, and state park projects. More than 800 million for mental health facilities, including 625 million for a new 350-bed Western State Hospital, 1.2 billion for projects in higher education, and $50 million to match federal funding to expand broadband coverage. So again, it was well received, and I'm sure we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty with amendments and all that for Wednesday, but that's what I have today.
Representative Stokesbury.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Echo a lot of what my colleague in the Senate, Senator Wilson, just had to say. I'm sure everybody saw the revenue forecast that came out yesterday. I would characterize it as disappointing, but not surprising. Anybody who has been following the economic news over the past couple of months, anybody who has been following Dr. Elutra's forecasts, knew that there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty in the financial markets and the economy. And I think we are finally seeing some of that crystallize in our forecasts here in Washington. The very indefatigable Jason Mercier from the Washington Policy Center kind of posed a rhetorical question on Twitter this morning that was, if you had $10 today, thought you were going to have $15 tomorrow, and it turns out you're only going to have $13 tomorrow, are you $3 better off or $2 worse off? And I think that paradox kind of illustrates what Senate Republicans and House Republicans have been saying in terms of the budget for the past several years. We knew that times were very, very good, and we were beating the drum trying to use those good times to provide tax relief to the people who needed it the most, funding the working families tax credit, providing broad-based tax relief, but not nearly enough was done. Nothing was done when inflation was the highest, state revenues were the highest. It was the easiest time to do it and the time it was most needed. And the majority parties could not find it in themselves to do what states like California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts all were able to do. And now with revenue down by about $800 million, revenue projections down by about $800 million over this 5-year budget period, it looks like that might be an impossible Gordian knot to untie at this point. We'll see. I think first and foremost, the biggest goal, as Senator Wilson mentioned, is avoiding any new tax increases at this point. That would just be disastrous for the state and entirely unnecessary. But I think House and Senate Republicans will continue to fight for responsible, sustainable budgets, knowing that the $800 million reduction in expected revenues that we saw yesterday could very well just be the tip of the iceberg, and we might have much more difficult budget times ahead of us. If we proceed cautiously and prudently and responsibly, we can minimize the fallout from these bad economic times and do our best to take care of the states most vulnerable. If we spread ourselves too thin, we set ourselves up for even deeper failure than we would otherwise realize. So I think that'll be our message to our colleagues in the coming weeks as we debate and vote on the majority's budget packages.
All right, with that, we'll get to questions. Let's go to Jerry Cornfield.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my questions. I guess I'll start with you, Representative Stokesbury, because you were on the floor with a special education striking amendment a couple of weeks ago. And can you just tell us where special education funding is in your view, and compare and contrast the best you can those bills that are there, and maybe Senator Braun would be able to tell the Senate perspective.
Yeah, great question, Jerry, and appreciate you watching that debate unfold. I think you saw House Republicans take a stand in a way that maybe the House Republicans of 10 years ago wouldn't have. It's very clear that special education has been a source of underfunding in the state over the past at least the past 5 or 10 years, probably longer than that, but I can only speak to the time I've been here. I think there's broad bipartisan agreement on the need to improve those investments, but some disagreement over just how big of improvement is necessary. I think Republicans, are harking back to our McCleary days, which doesn't seem that long ago, but kind of was, of the need to fund education first. It's the paramount duty of the state. I understand that there are other needs, but we need to make sure we are fully funding all education, including special ed, first, and then we can sort out what's left after that and how much money we have to address those other needs. So I think the difference you saw was a difference in sort of scope of spending. There's also a really key policy difference in those two bills. Again, as I've always said, the point of education funding is not just to write checks, but is to improve outcomes. So the Senate, led by Senator Braun and some others, had a really novel idea of trying to include kind of advocates for kids going through the special education system to make sure that they are able to have an IEP plan that is developed and tailored to their needs that will help them succeed. If a kid is lucky enough to be born into a family with parents who have time to navigate the system and understand how to navigate the system, that is fantastic. Not every kid is quite so lucky. There's language barriers, time barriers, things like that. And so Senator Braun's idea would try to help take care of those kids as well. So the House Republican amendment to that bill would have both increased the amount of dollars spent on special ed, would have also included that key policy addition. Unfortunately, that was voted down on a near party line vote, but it wasn't just a vote. You heard about a dozen speeches from House Republicans talking about how critical it is to fund this really serious need of the state. As for the policy component to that, I was cautiously optimistic after the vote because there was a separate bill dealing with some special ed policy issues unrelated to funding, really, and was optimistic based on some conversations with that bill sponsor that we could maybe incorporate this advocate idea. Unfortunately, that other bill never came to the floor, so we weren't able to do so. So it still remains in flux. Our bill's over in the Senate. I think we have the Senate's bill. I'm optimistic we can improve on where the House Democrats landed at. But they're the ones with the 50 votes, so we'll see.
Hey, Drew, let me give a little bit of history on that amendment as well. When we realized that Democrats were not sufficiently funding special ed, when that was probably the number one topic of all educational professionals over more than just the last year or even 2 years, I asked our budget lead to put together the most effective possible approach to that within a budget that we would pass if we were in charge. The hallmark, I think, of House Republicans this session in particular has been, we're going to be serious. We're not going to rant. We're not going to score cheat points. We're going to offer the things that would actually help the people, and in this case, some of the most vulnerable children in Washington. And 2 weeks in advance, Drew and staff members went to work to do that, and it's not over yet. Those ideas, I think, had a chance to permeate the minds of the people that were on the floor that day. I think Democrats had a hard time voting that down, and we've got several other opportunities to incorporate much higher numbers in special ed and also more effective approaches.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. I think that Drew and JT covered this pretty extensively, but this is not surprisingly an idea we supported. It's a Republican proposal for many of the last 5 years as we tried to bring sufficient funding to special education. I just want to be clear, this is a bill that gets a long way in the right direction, but it doesn't solve the whole problem. I'm very proud of the Senate bill. I'm very proud of my House colleagues and the Republican caucus that fought to make the bill that came out of the House a better bill. I'm hopeful that we'll get to a better place. It gets after the 15%, raises the cap to 15%, which is a step in the right direction. The Senate bill also allows for to go above the cap for districts that have high need special education students, for districts under 1,000 students. And this is specifically an issue that our smaller schools have struggled with for years. So two good things in the way of funding. And then the advocacy piece. This is a bill that we have supported for a number of years. We've passed out of the Senate on a bipartisan basis before. The challenge is it takes some funding and takes commitment to making sure each of these children are looked after and their interests are defended. And I think we have I'm hopeful, at least, that we have the right formula to get it all the way this year. And we're getting good support in the Senate from both sides of the aisle. I think to the comments that JT and Drew made, the House Democrats are starting to understand that this is a problem that we really need to solve in our state. So hopefully we'll get all the way during this session.
This is a good opportunity here to go a little broader into education, if you don't mind. We have been beating the drum about learning loss for quite some time. And, since 2013, we have not really our trajectory has not been up. It's been more down. We used to be in the top 10 states, and now we are not any longer. We are quite down the line. But it is very disappointing when we look at our children and the grade levels, where they stand at grade level. So 1 in 3 children are not at grade level in reading. And math is just as bad. And in fact, I looked at a report the other day, and in fact, I went right back to my alma mater to see exactly where we were at in math proficiency. And my alma mater, my high school in my district, was at a little over 10%. And when I looked at all the schools, there were only 2 that were over 50%, and that was barely over 50% in the entire Evergreen School District. What I found out last week was there is now $100 million sitting at OSPI that has not been spent, specifically earmarked for learning loss. So that is extremely disappointing. It is ESSER funds, and it has to be spent soon. So we need to be looking at this. I'm a little surprised. It was OSPI was not forthcoming with this, and so it was found out a little different way. But we did find it out. So we have got to do something about this funding and get it out there to our children so that they can start getting back to where they should be. I mean, we should be with our paramount duty being education in this state. This is really where we need to be focusing on for our kids. And so we need to keep up with this and move forward. Thank you.
Jerry, did you have a follow-up?
I'll let others go, but if there's time at the end, I'll have another question.
Okay, great. Let's go to Claire Withicum of the Seattle Times.
Good morning. Senator Wilson, with the release of the Senate capital budget proposal yesterday, I wonder if you could just give us the highlights in a sense, for you, what are some of the more important investments? Are there things that you disagree with? Thank you.
Well, okay, so I have not been deep into the capital budget because I'm operating budget, but I did go over a few of these. There are we had especially the funding for the schools, for particularly the rural schools, for schools that haven't had a dime go into them for years now need to get this modernization money. And so I think that is excellent, as well as the seismic activity of these schools. We have many schools that are not seismically sound, and so there's a chunk of money going to that, as much as could go to there to actually be able to use the money in a timely fashion. There's projects in higher ed that are very good. We have funding for broadband. I mean, broadband has always been an issue. Well, not always, but at least in the last several years, where the pandemic has shown us where we are failing in that area. So there is funding going there. It is a bipartisan budget, but most of the time capital budgets are. That's really about what I would be able to tell you.
Yeah, I would just highlight a couple things if I may, real quick. So I would say this is a big win for K-12 small schools in particular, as Senator Wilson said. Higher ed does really well in this budget, and I think they're very pleased. And I think the big winner is in housing. I have said this was my 11th year in the Senate. I've sat through 11 of these hearings on capital budgets. I have never heard housing advocates show up and be so appreciative and grateful for the investment in housing as I did last night during the session, during that hearing. So I think this budget is absolutely focused on our biggest needs, in particular in housing, and does so in a responsible way that we can afford to do and execute on and get after the challenges we have.
Did you have a follow-up, Claire?
No, thank you very much.
All right. Next, we will go to Joe O'Sullivan from Crosscut.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. For Representative Stokesbury and Senator Wilson, I'm curious if you were the budget writer this year in the majority. I know you talked about a few different things, but what specific policies would you have in there and take a run at this year? And then also in terms of reserves, what type of hard dollar or percentage of reserves do you think should be in a finished budget this year?
Well, I guess I can make a stab at that. I think we would want to make sure we address the state's most urgent needs first, and fully fund our priorities, rather than spreading the money thin around peanut butter and trying to satisfy everybody. As I mentioned a minute ago, I think education is our paramount duty. I'm backed up in that thinking by the Constitution, which makes it clear that it's the paramount duty of the state. So I'd make sure that we were fully funding special education. Make sure that we were taking substantial, serious, data-driven steps to improve student outcomes, and in particular this year, addressing the learning loss that has occurred. So I think those would be a couple of our immediate priorities in the K-12 space. There are a number of other issues around housing, around mental health, around natural resources that I think would get our attention. But we would not try to pass a budget that did everything for everybody. We would try to focus on where our money could be most effectively spent. And we would be cautious and prudent. And I appreciate the question about reserves. So I don't have an exact dollar or percentage amount, but the state treasurer just sent an email or a letter to budget writers, I believe just yesterday, where he did some of that math. And so I would make sure that we were carefully and faithfully adhering to the treasurer's really excellent and prudent recommendations. He helps, among other things, manage our bond offerings. And so following those ratings or following that guidance will not only put us on solid financial ground for future budgets, it will also save the state money through lower interest costs. So I would look seriously at what the treasurer is recommending and follow those recommendations closely. And a little outside your question, but to the extent for the reserves that we do maintain, I would make sure that those are kept in the rainy day fund that is constitutionally protected and requires a supermajority vote to spend. An unfortunate trend of the past couple years has been the majority party siphoning off money out of the constitutionally protected rainy day fund into a separate account that does not require a supermajority vote to spend down. I think that is far beyond the spirit of our state constitution, and don't think that that is an appropriate measure to take. So,
I would say when I would follow on here from what Representative Stokesbury said, I also received a letter from Mr. Pelliciotti, and I think he's right. I think that we need to have a substantial amount of money in our rainy day fund. I know that probably more money will probably go into what's the WARPTA account, the Washington Recovery Act account, which is generally a slush fund that you can use without required vote to use. So I would say that, looking that we're going to have we have the inflation that we have, and we're looking at a recession that is looming. We should be prepared so that down the line, when there are cuts that have to be made, it isn't cuts to the programs for the people that need it the most. So I would also say that we need to fund public safety, right? That's been a top issue for us. And so a way to do that would be to fund ways to hire back more law enforcement officers. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing are more and more bills that are going to probably discourage our police from not only not coming into this field, but actually leaving, because more and more onuses are put upon them that they can't reach, or taking away the tools that they need to keep our community safe. So I would certainly look to fund more of them. And then, of course, as I said earlier, I would try to find a way for tax relief. So this inflation is hitting so many people in our state. When you look at the core inflation, that doesn't include the of your food and clothing and all that, which is skyrocketing. I mean, when you find, I hate to say eggs, but eggs are costing a lot of money these days, and that's a staple. So, that's something that we need to look at. And I think it's important that we consider the taxpayers as we move forward in coming years, as we need to trim our budgets.
Did you have a follow-up, Joe?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to Jeannie Lindsay of Northwest News Network.
Hello, good morning. I am wondering if any of you can talk just about some of the policy work that's being done this session and what impact you see it potentially having on real revenue. Obviously, there are several factors listed in the revenue forecast for what that outlook and those predictions look like, but are you seeing any connections between the policy work that's being done and real revenue potential to maybe change the outlook?
Well, I'll give you a few examples that I think are exactly the kind of policy and its impact on state revenues that Republicans believe in, and that is the large number of bills that are going to immediately make it easier to split lots, for example, build ADUs, add housing in urban areas, and at the same time, recognition on both sides, finally, that permitting delays get in the way. And nothing will raise revenue more quickly than all of the economic activity associated with construction in our state, both directly and also through the large amount of wages that are paid to the hardworking people that are involved in construction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was exactly the answer I think is the most impactful policy that we're doing this session has to do with housing, our construction industry, and this is an enormous sector. There's enormous demand. If we can get this restarted and headed in the right direction to build affordable, accessible housing for the people of our state, will have a huge impact on our future revenue and our future budgets. And the other thing I would add is we have to do the good things, but we have to not do the bad things. And the bad things out there still are, we have a growth management bill out there that involves climate change. It would add cost. We have some bills that go after landlords that would add cost and would discourage folks from investing in the state of Washington. We have a REIT bill, a real estate excise tax, that would also add cost. So we got to do the good things that Senator Wilcox or Representative Wilcox, apologize, JT. I know that's slander for you, but Representative Wilcox mentioned, we also have to not do the bad things that will discourage folks from coming and investing in our state. That's the sort of things we got to get done or not done in that case to be successful.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeannie?
No, thank you so much.
Okay. Next, we will go to Elena Perry of the Spokesman Review.
Hi, I actually don't have a question today, but thank you for calling on me.
Okay. All right. This next question comes from Drew Mickelson of King 5. He asks, is your party involved in any of the discussions regarding the Pursuit bill? Can we expect Republicans to try and force the issue to come up for a floor vote again?
The ball is kind of in the House's court, so I'll go first. Because this is the background of an awful lot of discussion between members. Remember, 20 Democrats sponsored the original bill that was, I think, much more productive than the bill that came over from the Senate. 20 Democrats sponsored that, 20 Republicans sponsored that. Every Republican would vote yes, it would pass easily off the floor if those 20 Democratic sponsors voted for it. So between members, there is a lot of conversation going on between, leaders in that arena. I know that there's been conversation about when is the bill going to be heard? Is there going to be a vote scheduled on that? I guess what I feel like when it comes to forcing a vote is I want every single opportunity for that bill to pass in regular order. I don't want to hear at the end of this, oh, we would have brought this bill up, but Republicans wanted to bypass the process. No, I want to allow every bit of process that the Democrats demand for this bill. But if we reach the end of that road and they've ignored every single opportunity to bring it up for a floor vote, then darn right, we're going to offer every member of their caucus an opportunity to vote on whether or not we bring it up to the floor. And they deserve that.
Yeah, as JT said, this is really in play in the House at this point. Our role now is for folks who voted for that bill on both sides of the aisle in the Senate to be talking to their seatmates, encouraging them to push this forward. I am hopeful that they're successful in the House, and more than just successful in the bill that we sent over there, because I agree with Representative Wilcox that it's a half step in the right direction, but it does not solve the bigger problem. If we could get back to the bill that either Representative Rule or Senator Lovelich sponsored early on that had bipartisan support, that bill would pass overwhelmingly in both chambers, and that would be a better bill to serve, meet the needs of the state of Washington. But right now, we're just trying to keep it, one thing at a time. Right now, we just got to help from afar, encouraging it to get heard and move out of committee.
All right. In closing, we'll go back to Jerry Cornfield.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if any of you could comment on this, but there's a new bill heard yesterday in House and Senate Transportation dealing with the ferry vessel procurement. It makes some pretty significant changes to how the state goes about trying to build new ferries. Any input, any thoughts on where your caucus stands on these proposed changes?
And Jerry, I know just a very little bit about the bill. I knew it was dropped and it was going to be heard. It has to do with making sure, as I understand, we can get all the ferries we need built. We have sort of a crisis that's not getting a lot of attention unless you happen to live where you need a ferry in our state. We don't have enough ferries or enough folks to run the ferries. And part of that is the building process. And I think the driver on that bill is to make sure we can either find a way to build these ferries successfully and on time in the state of Washington, or if we can't, to look for other reasonable, sources for those ferries. And at the same time, improve the long-term cost of owning and operating ferries and the interchangeability of those ferries. So this is a big, complex bill, as I understand it. And I've already probably said more than I really know about the bill, but that's the idea. We'll see. I haven't heard the outcome of the hearing to know kind of what the public's, what kind of feedback we're getting from the public. So I'd be reluctant to take any kind of position just yet.
Jerry, I've had some extensive briefings from Andrew Barkus, my seatmate and our transportation lead, and John is modest. He got it all right as far as I can tell. And just to say again, we want to absolutely give the first shot at building these huge, complex vessels here in Washington in a company that conducts its operations here, and especially with people that work here in Washington and are taxpayers in the state of Washington. But we also recognize that there is, limited capability of doing this. And if we go down the route of purely looking at a Washington state company and we're unable to come to an agreement, as has happened in the past, we lose years. And so we have to go down both paths at the same time, making it very clear that our preferred path is in Washington. And if it's necessary to go outside of Washington, the company that would do it would have to do it under, the same environmental and labor conditions as we would have here in Washington. I think there's a lot of sincerity in this approach. I hope that it ends up being built in Washington, but that's not the only option that exists.
Okay, let's go to closing remarks from the Republican leaders. Representative Wilcox.
Well, I'm just glad to have so many of you on here. Great questions. It's really good in politics to be challenged once in a while. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate people that really know what's going on in Olympia asking us the questions that you ask. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll repeat thank you for being here and for keeping us focused on the issues that the public is interested in. I think this is these next few weeks are where we see where the rubber meets the road. And we've talked a lot about our priorities: public safety, affordability, education. This is where we find out what bills, what policies are actually going to make it all the way through, and which ones are going to get funded. So we got this is not a lot of time left, but the most important time in the next few weeks where we get the critical work done for the people of the state of Washington. Thanks again for being here. Look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you, everyone.